Welcome to 247 Real Talk. I'm your host, Julian Plary. It's a pleasure to be here with you for another week. I hope you had a great week last week. It's been pretty hot in New York and across the country, across the United States. I hope you had a productive week and we're ready to engage in the conversation for this week. And it's going to be an engaging one. It's something that I've touched on many times, but I think the time is right. And I promised several of my listeners that I would have another episode, record another episode discussing student loans, not in its past sense, so to speak, but now that the Supreme Court has ruled and what's to come, and I will sort of explain some of the comments I made in the past. So get ready, sit back, relax, and I'll be right back with you. So welcome back to 247 Real Talk Podcast. Again, it's been a pleasure to be here with you. I thank you so much for joining me for another episode. I want to start off by extending my appreciation, in case I don't do it often enough, to all of those listeners who've been out there contacting me, engaging in conversation, spreading the word. People who see me at church, people who see me on the street, people who see me at work, people who see me virtually on WhatsApp and text messaging. I really appreciate the engagement, the encouragement. I encourage you to share and subscribe, and let's get a bigger audience and a bigger place to discuss values, whether we agree or disagree, and get to a place where the ultimate value is human life and the quality of life. So this week I'm going to talk about student loans. You're going to see me looking down a bit. I promise that within the next, couple of months, I'm probably going to have a screen somewhere here where I can actually go through live news and read from the screen as opposed to pieces of paper that I print or write on to remember notes. But at the end of the day, it's all about the conversation, right? So unless you've been hiding somewhere, you know that the Supreme Court ruled against President Biden's student loan forgiveness plan that was, I believe, was $10,000 for some people and $20,000 for couples based on income. And I want to first of all address something that I said before, that one of my very strong supportive listeners mentioned to me. He said that I've been difficult or I've been hard on President Biden in the past in regards to my criticism of him on his student loans and his student loan plans. So let me clarify some things. One is, there was a point where there's two things I criticized, and it started with when they were extending the moratorium, right? And if you were listening to me way back then, you would have heard me say the White House is sending a bad message. Their PR person is not doing a great job because they came out and said, well, we're only extending it till October. We were in the middle of a pandemic. No one knew what was going to happen. They said, we extend it to October and that's it, no more. Then they came back in October and said, we extend it to January and that's it, and we're done. You'll have to repay. Then they came back in January and said, we're extending it to August again or whatever. So the point is that it shows indecisiveness, and it shows, like they're a bit out of touch with the issue at times. And then when they discussed in this past January the case that went to the Supreme Court, and President Biden at the time, this was before he signed the debt ceiling bill that sort of took away his option of extending it again officially. But he did say that when the Supreme Court ruled, expect to start repaying student loans about 2 months after, and he would have done all he can do. Well, once again, in a good way, what he said, or whatever his PR team instructed him to say. Thankfully, that's not the case, and he has come up with alternatives. And I give him praise, just as I've criticized him. I give him praise for fighting back and not just saying, "Well, the Supreme Court has ruled, and that's it. I can't help you anymore." he's come up with very unique and he's come up with ways that are currently within the education system that are already part of it. He's utilizing them, some of them very well, very effectively. I think some of them ultimately are going to be challenged in court because we know that our rich Republican friends, and I say rich Republican because the majority of them, let's be frank, are Republicans. There's not a whole lot of rich Democrats who are opposing this plan. They, for some reason, want to make sure that the socioeconomic divide between rich and poor not only remains wide but gets wider. So anything that can be done to help people get a leg up, people less fortunate, people who have been trying, who've been dealing with systemic racism, people who've been struggling, have been dealing with not only race issues but gender issues, right? Women who've been paid less and who are passed over for promotion or hiring because there were other male candidates. None of it they don't take any of that into consideration. They tend to believe that, well, you took out a student loan, so you should pay it off. They don't look at any circumstances in between. I heard one, I think it was someone from the House, member of the House, even say, why take out a student loan if you don't intend to pay it back? And I don't think anybody takes out student loans, I would think not, for the most part, with the intention of not paying them back. So let's get right into it because I'm not going to drag this out. It's pretty late. I started late this evening, and quite frankly, it's been a hot week and a hard week at my 9 to 5, and I'm pretty exhausted, but I have to take this effort to continue these conversations because it's important to me to give back, and it's important to you as you've expressed to me. So President Biden came up with something in response to the Supreme Court ruling called Saving on a Valuable Education. It's called a SAVE plan. And it encompasses several things. It's mainly about the income-driven repayment. Now, you've heard me talk before about the fact that the income-driven repayment plan needs to be completely overhauled. And what President Biden is doing now is at least a partial overhaul. I don't see everything in the overhaul I'd like to see, but he made some changes. Let's see what it says here. The income-driven repayment plan will cut borrowers' monthly payments in half, allow many borrowers to make zero monthly payments, save all other borrowers at least $1,000 per year, and ensure borrowers don't see their balances grow from unpaid interest. So let me tell you what the plan will do. And I'll tell you as I go along these steps what I agree or disagree with. For undergraduate loans, it will cut in half the amount that borrowers have to pay each month from 10% to 5% of discretionary income. So bravo for doing that, first of all. That's the pro. Let me talk about my cons here. One, we live in a society today that the undergraduate degree, while important, is simply not enough in most fields. Most fields, a minimum of a master's degree is what gets you to the higher positions or the better paying positions. I would like to see that 5% extended to all loans, including graduate loans, because graduate degrees have become a prerequisite to a better chance of a higher income. That's a fact. So that part to me falls short. The second part is of discretionary income. I've spoken before about what discretionary income should encompass. And it does not take into consideration things like your rent or your mortgage, your transportation, especially for people who either get a monthly Metro card in New York or you pay the Long Island Railroad or the Metro North, something that you have to pay to get to work. The fact that if you get a $300 electricity bill, over $150 of electricity, over 50% of electricity bill is delivery charges alone, means that that's a utility that the government is doing nothing about to decrease for. It's increasing to decrease for people who have to pay electricity bills. And therefore, I think if you can show your bills for a year or whatever period, that should be a part of what's taken into consideration when they come up with the final figure of your discretionary income. If you were to take enough of the basic fundamentals that people have to pay, housing, electricity, if you pay that, gas, if you own a home, gas bills are crazy, okay? fundamental things, then the discretionary income amount changes. And then you do 5% of that for all student loans. And now you're really doing something hefty for the borrowers, because now you're giving them an opportunity to live and to pay back these loans and not default on them, and to be able to make ends meet within the lower incomes that they have. The second thing here is raise the amount of income that is considered non-discretionary and therefore is protected from repayment, guaranteeing no borrower earning under 225% of the federal poverty level, about the annual equivalent of a $15 minimum wage for a single borrower, will have to make monthly payments under this plan. So while he's talking about raising the amount of income that is considered non-discretionary, that's exactly what I'm saying, except he's not raising it using the considerations that I'm referring to, right? The mortgage, the rent, because if federal people who are paying a mortgage don't really fall into that federal poverty level algorithm, but they still have a struggle. They still are working hard and a part of the American dream, and they still need someone to consider their expenses because they bought into this great country of ours. They bought real estate. They're not living above their means. They're just struggling because of all the other things that society has created that don't allow them to excel as they should, but they're trying. You can't just ignore that because they're not part of that federal poverty level ceiling. Forgive loan balances after 10 years of payments instead of 20 years for borrowers with original loan balances of $12,000 or less. Okay, that's good. You're allowing them only to have to pay 10 consecutive years of payments. And I think they took out the consecutive, at least in the open enrollment last year, it had to be 10 years of or 20 years of payments cumulatively, not consecutively. But when you say original loan balances of $12,000 or less, let's be real. Come on. How many people go to university, and a reputable university that gets them a reputable degree, that gets them a reputable job on a considerate income, that spend less than $12,000 in student loans? That's if you're taking out student loans, $12,000 doesn't even cover a semester these years. I remember when I went to college, it was I think if I went to 2 semesters part-time, it was under $3,000 per semester. Last I checked at my old university that I went to, and this was a few years ago, I checked, the tuition was $21,000 a year, and I'm sure it's gone up. So $12,000, I don't know who you're talking to, but it does say here the department estimates this reform will allow nearly all community college borrowers to be debt-free within 10 years. To be debt-free in 10 years after going to community college doesn't that make you cringe? If for it to take 10 years for you to be debt-free to go into community college, I don't know. Government has such a hand in things like community colleges that really and truly they should be doing better with education. Education, if you go into community college and you're meeting a certain GPA, maybe your education should be free. Maybe the government should foot that bill. The last one I'm seeing here is not charge borrowers with unpaid monthly interest, so that unlike other existing income-driven repayment plans, no borrower's loan balance will grow as they make their monthly payments, even when the monthly payment is zero because their income is low. So basically, they're saying your income, your interest will no longer accrue. That's basically what they're saying, right? Unpaid monthly interest. So normally, in each month there's interest that's billed, interest accumulates, and then when you're making your monthly payment, there's some money that goes to the principal and a ton of money that goes to the interest, and you keep paying and the loan keeps going up, right? Because the balance keeps increasing because of the level of interest. They're going to cut that out. It says all students in repayment will be eligible to enroll in SAVE plan. they'll be able to enroll later this summer before any monthly payments are due. And it goes on to tell you about borrowers signing up, and then there's one more thing I want to cover here because this is really important. They're working on creating something called a temporary on-ramp. And as I understood this, for the next 12 months, when after repayments start, if you cannot make a monthly payment, or if you're short, if you don't have enough money, you make a smaller monthly payment, it will not count as a default. The interest will accrue, but it will not count as a default. And it will not be reported to the credit bureau, which is big because we know what defaults on student loans can do to your credit, right? It can wipe out, for many, many years, 10, 12 years, your dream of becoming a homeowner or getting enough credit to get a mortgage, even get a credit card, even get credit for anything. So that helps. Now, why I think it's important that you share this podcast and that you listen to it if you have student loans, anyone who has student loans, is because a lot of times people I've spoken to don't know that these options exist. Even before these options, what options existed. And I think it's important because this is something that's debilitating for many Americans, right? 40-something million people. Now, let me tell you what President Biden has done so far before I go on to the last part of this podcast. Well, from my knowledge, just recently he got rid of $39 billion in student debt. And the way he did it was, the government was at fault, right? The federal government, people were paying into the income-driven repayment program, and they were not getting properly credited for their payments. So when they decided to revisit all the payments, they found that many, many people had satisfied the payment requirements of whatever it was, 20 years, 10, whatever, and were still paying. So they wiped out the rest of all those loans of people who met those requirements, and that amounted to $39 billion in student loans. So, before I go on to the last part of this, which is basically advising people what options they have, I'm going to give credit where credit is due. I love the fight back that President Biden has finally, got in his spirit. There are still some blunders. I pointed them out. 5% of all federal student loans. Who gives a crap whether it's undergraduate or graduate? It's a federal student loan. It's federal money, right? Whether it's undergrad or graduate, the fact of the matter is, making it limited to 5% of your discretionary funds is important because most people who really want to excel and are using not the entrepreneurship path, but or by itself, but the educational path as a foundation at least. Most of them have to get a master's degree. Some people are lucky not to have it. I know people who are making $250,000 and all they have is an associate degree. So some people, but that's not the majority, right? The majority of people go in and they vie for positions based on experience and based on education. So a master's is a prerequisite for many people, and many fields require a master's to move on to the next level. And therefore, they should be all lumped in as one in terms of the 5%. And President Biden have this, the way that they determine discretionary funds revamped to give people a chance by considering real life mandatory expenses. So now for the last part of the podcast, I'm going to move on to those who are, have to start repaying come September or October or whenever it is. And I think they said October, but whatever day or in October is based on your who's the lender that's managing or the company that's managing your federal student loans. There are several forgiveness programs out there, more than I even knew about, and I think you should know about them because maybe, just maybe, another bulk of you fall into these categories and can get some real relief. So there's the income-driven repayment forgiveness. And I'm going to read what it says there. The federal government offers 4 main income-driven repayment plans, which allow you to cap your loan payments at the percentage of your monthly income. We discussed that. When enrolled in one of these plans, your remaining loan balance will be eligible for forgiveness after 20 or 25 years, depending on the plan. These plans are most beneficial for those with large loan balances relative to their income. And so this is important to look at. Um, and if you fall into that category, it's helpful, even though I've got a problem with, again, the way they work out discretionary funds or discretionary income. The next one is a big one that I found: public service loan forgiveness. Now, we have a large population of people who work for government, city, state, or federal. And it's available for government and qualifying nonprofit employees with federal student loans. Eligible borrowers can have the remaining loan balance forgiven tax-free after making 120 qualifying loan payments. And up until October of last year, as I mentioned, the Education Department had expanded which payments on federal student loan counted towards this forgiveness. So there was a waiver, a limited time waiver, and that waiver allowed was if you made payments and you stopped and you started and you stopped and you started and you stopped and you deferred and you did forbearances and you paid some and you paid parts, because you get the loans are separated as they're issued, right? And you keep paying parts and you pay to this one, you pay to that one. And during that waiver time, if they added up all the individual payments you made and there were 120 payments, your loans were forgiven. I also think there was a certain amount of credit for time served too as a public employee, but I'd need to delve into that more before. I don't want to give you wrong information. There's a teacher loan forgiveness. Teachers employed full-time in low-income public elementary or secondary schools may be eligible for teacher loan forgiveness after working for 5 consecutive years. They can have up to $17,500 in federal direct or Stafford loans forgiven. And I'm sorry, my page cut off there. That's what happens when you don't have a screen in front of you. Then there's student loan forgiveness for nurses. Nurses shouldering student debt have several options of student loan forgiveness. Public service is one, Perkins loan cancellation, and the Nurse Corps loan repayment program, which pays up to 85% of qualified nurses' unpaid college debt. Public service loan forgiveness may be the most likely option for nurses. For most nurses, few borrowers have Perkins loans, and the Nurse Corps program is highly competitive. So apparently the Nurse Corps program is something you have to compete to be a part of. So that's not really universally applied, right? Then there's state-sponsored repayment assistance programs. Licensed teachers, nurses, doctors, and lawyers in certain states may be able to take advantage of programs to assist with repaying debt. For example, the Mississippi Teacher Loan Repayment Program will pay up to $3,000 per year of a maximum of 4 years for undergraduate educational loans. Again, these numbers like 3,000, this is something that Biden and his administration need to revisit. These numbers are numbers from 20 years ago, okay? I don't know if they look at the cost of education these days, and not everybody goes to community college. Matter of fact, most people don't. So the fact is, if you look at what education costs these days, these numbers, are just to be able to say, oh, I did something. But if you want to make an impact, you need to revisit the cost of education and what you're offering. And then there's one called the last one. No, there's two more. There's one called Military Student Loan Forgiveness and Assistance. Military personnel in the 5 branches, including National Guard, may qualify for their own loan forgiveness programs. In the National Guard, for example, qualifying soldiers and officers could receive up to $50,000 to pay off federal student loans through the Student Loan Repayment Program. Well, $50,000 is better than $3,000 a year for 4 years, right? $3,000 a year for 4 years with the state sponsor is $12,000. The military is offering $50,000. So, that's a decent amount of money, right? Then there's additional student loan repayment assistance programs. There may be some other national organizational student loan repayment assistance programs offered by public service professionals. The National Institute of Health, for example, offers up to $35,000 in debt assistance annually. That's big. Offers up to $35,000 in debt assistance annually to health professionals who are appointed by the institutes to conduct research. That's also a small population. And then there's Perkins loan cancellation. Borrowers with federal Perkins loans can have up to 100% of their loans canceled if they work in a public service job for 5 years. So that's the other thing I think I was referring to, or that may be part of it, right? If you took out the various loans, I remember when I went to college, there's, you take out the various loans to get to the number you need for education, and Perkins is one of them. And they're saying if you work for government, federal, state, city, federal, state, and you work for 5 years or more, you can have up to 100% of those loans canceled. So those are some of the things that I hope that you're listening to. Share the podcast to everybody you know that's going to be dealing with student loan, debt repayment. If they have questions, please have them email me at podcast@247realtalk.net. I will do the research for you. I will do a subsequent episode and delve deeper and provide more answers. I'm here to serve and I'm here to help people. I myself, and I have to be, full disclosure. I've spent now 33 years in my 33rd year with government, and was a beneficiary of some forgiveness, of which I'm very appreciative. And I want to make sure that many people experience the same. So I'm here to help. There's one other thing I read where they were allowing people who are seeking in the income-driven repayment plan, if you file taxes separately, then then your spouse's income will not be considered as part of the income in consideration of the repayment. Now, you probably look at my face, and those who hear my voice might hear it in my voice. I have a problem with this too, right? Yes, I do. Many people in households, with two-parent households, husband and wife, couples, either both have student loan debt, have had in the past, or maybe on a course, plotting a course that may require them to have in the future. If I take out student loans, then the repayment should be on me, not on my spouse. The consideration of income should be on me, because let's look at this in the manner in which I previously discussed. If I have a degree, and this is especially relevant for minorities, people of color, and women. If I have student loan debt, I have a degree, and I'm a minority woman, so I'm facing this systemic discrimination, this systemic racism based not only on my race, but prejudice because of my gender. And I'm going to applying job after job, and I'm not getting anywhere near what my degree is worth. And then you're telling me that, so I'm living according to my means. And then you're telling me now that the income that you're going to use to determine how my repayment can be done will include my spouse's income if I file taxes jointly. That should not be. I'm sorry. It should be my income. Because when you talk about discretionary income, let's think about the scenario where you have a couple, the husband is making $200,000 a year, and I'm making $60,000 a year, and it's my loans. The husband who's making $200,000 a year may be the one who's decided, I'm going to pay the mortgage. I'm the one who's going to pay, we live in the suburbs, we have 2 vehicles, I'm going to pay the leases. I'm going to repair the boiler in the house because we need a new one. I'm the one who's going to do the roof. What I'm saying is you are not taking into consideration the spouse's expenses. So you don't know how much discretionary money income the spouse has left based on his or her responsibilities. So decide that income becomes lumped in with the borrower's income because they filed taxes jointly makes no sense. The federal government already is the one who puts us all under this pressure, right? And people file taxes either, most times jointly, hoping to get the benefit of dependents and all. They look at the best way that after paying so much in taxes every single paycheck, at the end of the year, they're not completely wiped out, but whatever savings they have left by what the federal government says they still owe. Taxes are already high. Now you can put the burden of student loan on someone and use their spouse's income without having a clue about the spouse's expenses. So the spouse may have personal expenses. Let's think about this a second. Go even further. The spouse went to college, but he doesn't have, I'm using he, so please, he or she doesn't have student loans because they had a rich relative and they borrowed the money from the relative, personal loans. Look, I'm going to give you this $100,000 to go to school. I'm just making up the scenario. So now part of their income every month, they're paying back their relative. There's no documentation to show student loans and repayment, but they have bills and they have expenses. And now you're going to say, well, you know what? The person who's making the $60,000, who might be the one who's helping the household collectively to barely make it, I'm going to decide what your discretionary funds are based on your spouse's income and your income accumulatively. That is wrong. So when I say that to my specialty, I'm looking directly into the camera, into the lens. I'm saying this to my very supportive listener who I'm so grateful for. And I say it to him because I have a lot of listeners who are very supportive, but he's been my staunch supporter from day one. And he stood out among others because he always never fails to send supportive words every single week. And he sends his criticism too, which I embrace. These are the things I'm talking about that President Biden can do extra. Forget about what the Republicans are going to court for, what they're trying to do. This is real life, and these are real life scenarios. And these are things I believe he can do to help. Now, we also have to remember that we all need to take a step back and look within the next coming weeks or months, maybe the next month or two, what the reaction to some of these plans that President Biden is putting into place that he says cannot be challenged because they're an existing part of what's already built into the education system. But I'm sure someone's going to find some reason to say, hey, I'm going to take it to court because it's not right. Keep in mind that when you had the PPP loans, many members in Congress, some of them got over $1 million in loans forgiven. But now they want to make sure that now that they're $1 million plus forgiven and they can continue their life of luxury without that burden, they're going to make sure they keep their foot on your necks so that you are burdened, oppressed, and broken down so they can look down at you and say, I am mightier than you. But throughout all that, remember, we serve a great God who's mightier than us all. Again, it's been my pleasure. I went a little longer than expected, but it's always a pleasure to talk with you, to share perspectives, and it really energizes me when I know that people support me and continue to be part of this conversation. The YouTube 247 Real Talk podcast, please share it. Please subscribe. There's an audio version available on Buzzsprout and on every single podcast app that you can find out there. I leave links in the body of the YouTube episode to the website that also has all of the episodes. So please, let's keep this growing. Let's make it bigger. I appreciate you. I thank you. I'm wishing you a safe and blessed week ahead. Until the next time, until we speak again, please take care of yourselves and each other.